It's easy to dismiss the Suzuki Jimny as a toy car driven by people who want a fashion accessory rather than a serious off-roader. But the car is far more than that. Since its 1970 launch, the Jimny has used a proper 4x4 chassis that means it's not just some passenger car pretending to be an off-roader. It's been higher than any other car in the world, a record it holds to this very day. As they say, it's not the size, but how you use it. There's been controversy as well. It was the centre of a lawsuit over this high-sided car tipping over through bends. But it's still going strong after half a century. This is the Suzuki Jimny story. The Jimny didn't start life as a Suzuki project. The original car was created by Hope Motors in 1967. They were a small car company founded in 1952 and specialised in small, light three-wheeled vehicles. Their initial offerings were little more than motorcycles and similar to auto rickshaws or tuk-tuks. The company always struggled against bigger competitors such as Daihatsu and Mazda, so stopped making cars in 1965. However, with one last throw of the dice, they tried again in 1967 with the Hopestar ON 4-wheel drive or ON 360. This was much more substantial than Hope's previous vehicles, and being 4-wheel drive with body-on-frame construction, it was designed for rough terrain. The car would use a Mitsubishi 359cc engine, rear axle and wheels to save development costs. Top speed was a pedestrian 43 miles an hour, but this was all done to fit into Japan's strict K-car tax rules that restricted engines to 360cc and the car's length to just 3 meters. The miniature Jeep went on sale in December 1967. Early reviews from 4x4 publications weren't good, and the slapdash construction came in for criticism. For example, the steering could be damaged by large rocks, and it had a fuel gauge that was little more than a clear plastic pipe on the outside of the vehicle. 100 engines had been ordered from Mitsubishi, but such was the low demand, it's estimated just 15 of them were used on production models. Hope decided to exit the market for good and looked around for a buyer. They approached Mitsubishi, a natural choice as so many Mitsubishi parts were used on the car, but it would be Suzuki that would agree to purchase the car's design for 12 million yen. That's just £320,000 today. Suzuki certainly got the bargain of the century. To test the car's capabilities, Suzuki and Hope aimed the ON 360 at Mount Fuji and hit the accelerator pedal. The car got to the 5th station, about 61% of the way up the 3,700 metre mountain. Suzuki engineers got to work to transform Hope's off-roader into something that they could actually release. Many of the non-Suzuki parts were removed, including the Mitsubishi engine. Each Hope ON 360 had essentially been custom built, so Suzuki had to alter the chassis for mass production and create a new body. The new car could manually switch between powering the 2 rear wheels or all 4 wheels. 4-wheel drive mode could operate in high and low mode, with low mode providing half the speed. But with a top speed of just 47 miles an hour from Suzuki's 359cc engine in 2-wheel drive mode, the 4-wheel drive low mode was strictly for getting you out of trouble. The Suzuki Jimny was launched in 1970 as the LJ10 or Light Jeep 10. At the time, it was the first 4-wheel drive K-car, if of course you don't count Hope's ON 360. To keep the car less than 3 meters, the spare tyre was stored inside the car instead of on the back, but this meant that there was only one rear seat. Inside it was Spartan, like a miniature Land Rover. To make this a versatile mini off-roader, Suzuki added the ability to take power off the engine for accessories such as a winch. With little 4-wheel drive competition in Japan and no competitor making a car this small, the tiny LJ10 Jimny was a hit. Suzuki would roll out an update just 2 years later as the LJ20. The main difference was the switch from air cooling the engine to water cooling, mainly because of emissions regulations, but the new engine was also a little more powerful. It also got a Jeep-like vertical grille, a heater to allow it to operate in colder climates, and a new hardtop version. Suzuki were keen to get 4 seats into the car, so reworked the spare tyre placement to squeeze 2 tiny seats in the back. and they experimented with placing it on the roof to allow for decent sized rear seats. Suzuki would also try the car out in North America in 1971 as the Brute, where the spare tyre was bolted onto the rear of the car, as the 3-metre limit wasn't really a problem over there. To promote Sony's new colour TV and pneumatic video cassette system, Suzuki and Sony offered a Video Jimny. Sony's products could be powered by the Jimny's engine in some sort of odd record your favourite episode of Kamen Rider while you're in the wilderness pitch. Maybe it was aimed at TV production companies, but regardless, they didn't sell a single one. 1975 was a seminal year for Suzuki as they would build their first overseas car assembly line. The new version of the Jimny, the LJ50, would be manufactured in Pakistan. This new car would use a larger 539cc 3-cylinder engine. It would be sold in countries such as Australia, where a van version was also available. With the relaxing of K-car rules in Japan and new emissions regulations, by 1976 this larger engine was being used in Suzuki's home market. Foreign markets weren't constrained by K-car rules, of course, so the track was widened by 10 centimeters, the fuel tank got 50% larger, and the engine got another boost. The existing car was seen as severely underpowered, especially for a body-on-frame four-wheel drive off-roader, so the new Jimny 8 or LJ80 would get an 800cc 4-cylinder 42 horsepower engine in 1977. The larger engine needed a higher bonnet line, a shape that would become familiar in the 1980s. Suzuki also experimented with long wheelbase models in export markets to give the car a little bit more cargo space. The interior would also get a boost with new seats and steering wheel, and metal doors would become the norm rather than canvas. These features were turning the Spartan Jimny into a practical off-roader, and soon Suzuki was selling the LJ80 in Europe. A big update arrived in 1982 with the second generation model, and if you remember the 1980s, this will likely be your first introduction to the Jimny, or Samurai as it was often called. The chassis remained largely the same, although gas dampeners improved the archaic leaf spring suspension. While the car continued to get a small K-car engine in Japan, Suzuki continued to insert larger engines for export. In 1982, it was a 982cc 45 horsepower version of the previous 800cc engine, giving the car a top speed of 68 miles an hour. In 1981, Suzuki formed a joint venture with Maruti in India. Since then, Suzukis have become a common sight on Indian roads, and the Jimny was launched there in 1985 as the Gypsy. It was popular with the police and Indian military, and eventually exported to Australia, Chile, Hungary, Kenya and Malta. However, it failed in the Indian market with poor fuel economy and an unrefined interior and ride. It was also sold in New Zealand as the Suzuki Farm Worker. Due to not meeting New Zealand's crash protection regulations, it was only intended for farm work as it couldn't be registered on the road. Suzuki continued to expand production. In 1981, Jimnys were being built in Indonesia, and soon production would start in Thailand, Kenya and Colombia. In 1984, the Jimny was updated once more, receiving a larger 1.3 litre engine and a 5-speed gearbox and more powerful brakes. The body and interior were also redesigned with a new dashboard, seats and grille. Suzuki entered into a partnership with Spanish Santana Motors in 1985 to bypass European import rules and allow them to sell the car for much less in Europe. They softened the suspension to make it better on road, improved the interior, and in the 1990s added a 1.9 litre PSA turbo diesel to give the car an 81 mile an hour top speed. By the late 1980s, it was a common sight on European roads, becoming a fashion accessory for the Sharons and Britneys of the world who never took the car off-road. But in some respects, the car was still fairly basic. Changing between 2- and 4-wheel drive mode meant changing locking mechanisms on the wheels themselves. Not very convenient, and there's a claim that Indian drivers thought the fuel economy was bad because they didn't know how to put the car back into 2-wheel drive mode. In Japan, the car got fuel injection and a turbo to boost this tiny 543cc engine to 51 horsepower. New 1990 K-car rules boosted the engine to 657 cc's, allowing the power to eventually get to 64 horsepower with a respectable 75 mph top speed. In 1985, the Jimny made a triumphant return to the North American market as a Suzuki Samurai. Although it had been sold in 1971, it had been a tepid introduction through a third party. This time, Suzuki was all in. It was a real bargain, priced at just $6,200, which is about £11,700 today. Sales were initially strong, and in the first 3 years, Suzuki sold over 150,000 of them. By 1987, over 1 million Jimnys had been sold in over 100 countries. Suzuki pitched it as a fun lifestyle car for the masses, with the tagline, "Never a dull moment." Prophetic words, as soon just a few damaging words would bring sales crashing down. Consumer Reports is a non-profit that tests consumer products, and they'd become aware of the potential for the Jimny to roll over after a staff member had tested one. Upon testing it through their standard course, they'd been unable to tip it, and their test drivers reported it being no more likely to tip over than other cars. So Consumer Reports made the course harder to try to get it to tip. After many runs, they managed to get the car onto 2 wheels. Consumer Reports published an article damning the Jimny, using phrases like "easily rolls over in turns." In a press conference, they called the car dangerous, saying only very limited steering inputs could get the car onto 2 wheels, despite the test drivers needed to make extreme course corrections on a modified, harder course. The report made headlines worldwide, and there were petitions for the car to be recalled. Ironically, Suzuki had given the car a wider stance that same year. Despite Suzuki hitting back with a large TV ad campaign, sales of the Jimny in the US cratered, just at the time Suzuki was launching the larger Suzuki Sidekick, known as the Vitara in other parts of the world. With stricter safety rules not related to rollovers coming in 1995, Suzuki exited the US market. Just 1 year later, in 1996, Suzuki filed a $60 million lawsuit against Consumer Reports. During the court case, Consumer Reports' massaging of test results came to light. However, internal Suzuki documents showed that they'd been concerned for a long time about the Jimny's potential to roll over. Over the years, Suzuki Jimny rollovers have resulted in 213 deaths, and over 200 lawsuits have been settled. In 2004, both companies reached a settlement. Consumer Reports agreed they would no longer talk about their 1988 Jimny rollover article, and Suzuki agreed to drop any claim for damages. So was the Jimny really dangerous? Yes, it resulted in 213 deaths, but when you're selling a vehicle that can get into extreme off-roading situations, it's easy for untrained people to get themselves into trouble. If you watch the car being run through cones, it looks top heavy and it looks like it will tip over, but it wasn't the only vehicle at the time with a lot of body roll. In the 1980s, the US government mandated the CJ5 Jeep carry a sticker saying that if drivers make sharp turns or abrupt maneuvers, the vehicle may roll over, go out of control and crash. The Jimny wasn't recalled by any government body anywhere in the world, and the US federal authorities said it was no more likely to tip over than other cars already on the market. But Suzuki had been selling their Go Anywhere off-roader to customers who never took their car off-road and arguably weren't as good in emergency situations. It was those customers who saw the nightly news reports showing a seemingly unstable car going through cones, and they decided to purchase something else. This would start Suzuki's exit from the US automobile market, and they would continue to lean heavily on minority stakeholder General Motors to sell their cars for them. But with all the incentives in the world, a third party can never sell your product as effectively as you can, and Geo-branded Suzukis eventually disappeared from American roads. This whole episode would show just how much weight motoring journalists have. There have been similar cases such as the Top Gear Tesla feud in 2011. Rightly or wrongly, Consumer Reports' article effectively ended Suzuki Jimny sales in the USA. The pen is indeed mightier than the sword. While it is of course the responsibility of car companies to make a safe product, journalists also need to be sure their reporting is as accurate as possible. Outside of North America, the Jimny got an update in 1995 with better coil spring suspension. It got an automatic gearbox, and the interior got an update to bring the Jimny kicking and screaming into the 1990s. But these changes were a quick revision before a much bigger update in 1998 when the third generation Jimny was launched. This version was a little wider, but mainly through larger bumpers as the car still had to meet K-car size constraints. Yes, it's small, but how big do you need your 4x4 to be? It's small enough to fit into the tightest supermarket car parking spaces, because even mountain explorers need their Cheerios in the morning. The four-wheel drive system could now be controlled by 3 dashboard buttons, and new vacuum locking hubs allowed the wheels to automatically engage four-wheel drive mode. In Europe, where diesels were popular, a Renault 1.4 litre engine was available. And with all the glass and sunroof heating up the car, air conditioning was standard in some regions. The interior got another update to make it a thoroughly modern off-roader. Suzuki would also rebadge the car as the Mazda AZ Off-Road to sell it to more customers. In 2007, the Jimny set a new altitude record of 6,688 meters in South America. In the process, they found a sign left by the previous record holders who'd driven a Jeep Wrangler saying, "Jeep parking only, all others don't make it up here anyway." The Jimny record holders threw it in the back and kept it as a souvenir. After a massive 14 years, in 2012 the car got a small front facelift, but in truth the 20 years between the third version and the fourth version being launched were pretty quiet with not much changing. But after the chaos of the 80s and 90s, Suzuki was probably happy just to focus on selling cars. By the time of the fourth generation model, Suzuki had made 2.85 million Jimnys. It's maybe surprising that in 2018, when the fourth generation car appeared, that the underpinnings of the Jimny were still largely the same as they had been in 1970. The car was still body-on-frame construction when some off-roaders had switched to an integrated body and air suspension. It still used recirculating ball steering that felt loose on the road compared to modern rack and pinion steering. But although nearly 50 years had passed, this was still the best way to make an affordable 4x4. The car was updated with the latest 658cc turbo K-car engine for the Japanese market, and a 1.5 litre 100 horsepower engine for everybody else. It got a square, retro-looking design reminiscent of the early 80s car. Inside, it was another thing entirely. Features included automatic transmission, hill hold and descent control, cruise control, heated seats, climate control, electric windows, autonomous emergency braking, lane departure warning and traffic sign recognition. Earlier on, I described the Jimny as a miniature Land Rover, but the fourth generation Jimny has grown to be the same size as the first generation Land Rover. But at less than a third of the price than the current Defender, maybe the Jimny is the spiritual successor of that first Land Rover. If you live in Europe or USA, you might think that the Jimny has disappeared, but it's sold almost everywhere else in the world and continues to sell well. Like the original version, the Jimny is still an affordable way to go anywhere on Earth. A big thank you to all my patrons for supporting me. To get early advert-free access to new videos or to appear in the credits, please consider supporting me using the Patreon link below from just $1 or 80p a month, and hit that subscribe button to get notified of new videos. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.